A listening device is attached to your lapel pin. Annie Brooks spoke so quietly that the words barely traveled beyond the narrow space between them. Her fingers remained near the left lapel of William Harrington's navy suit, as if she were still adjusting the angle of the platinum pin. William went still and looked down at her. "What did you say?" Annie raised her eyes. "There is a listening device inside your pin, sir." She had worked at Harrington Global Holdings for only 6 days, and until that moment, the billionaire had never spoken to her directly. William narrowed his eyes. His breathing quickened, though his voice remained controlled. "That is not a funny joke, intern. Do you understand that the Global Investment Leadership Summit is about to begin? In a few minutes, I have to walk onto the main stage in front of hundreds of international investors. This is not the place to say whatever comes into your head." Annie did not look away. She wore the plain white shirt assigned to backstage interns, but her stillness made her seem more composed than several senior employees in the room. "I understand, Mr. Harrington," she said, keeping her voice low enough for only him to hear. "And if you walk onto that stage wearing it, every strategy discussed today could go directly to someone outside this building." William studied her. "I recommend that you examine it carefully." Inside the green room, 2 event coordinators reviewed the schedule, while Eleanor Price, the company's director of corporate communications, stood near the door with a headset pressed against one ear. A staff member stepped forward. "Mr. Harrington, the shareholders are ready. Miss Price is waiting to send you on stage." His gaze shifted impatiently toward Annie. "Hasn't the intern finished with your wardrobe yet?" William ignored him. "How could you possibly know there is something inside it?" he asked Annie. "I was assigned to check your tie, lapels, microphone, and presentation notes." Annie pointed to the rear edge of the pin without touching it. "There is a red light beneath the clasp. It flashes every 12 seconds. Your wireless microphone does not transmit on that cycle." William glanced down. "This is a platinum family pin, not something from a spy movie." "Why should I believe you?" "The casing near the hinge is warmer than the rest of the metal," Annie replied, "and the back plate is not sitting evenly." William's hand rose toward his lapel, then stopped. The pin had once belonged to his father. It was a narrow platinum shield engraved with the letter H, commissioned for the 40th anniversary of the company. William wore it only at major events. Very few people were ever permitted to touch it. He removed it carefully and placed it in his palm. William's expression did not change, but the room seemed to tighten around him. "Eleanor," he said, "delay the opening." She checked the time. "For how long?" "Until I tell you otherwise." Eleanor touched her headset and stepped toward the corridor. "We have a technical issue. Move the introductory video forward and hold the chairman's entrance." William turned toward the tall man standing near the private door. "Marcus, lock the room, now." Marcus Reed paused for only a fraction of a second. He had worked for the Harrington family since William's father was alive, and decades of experience had taught him that William's quietest orders were often the most serious. He activated the electronic lock. "What happened, sir?" "We need the secure conference room," William said. Marcus nodded and led William and Annie through a side door into a smaller room used for confidential presentations. Eleanor followed and locked the door behind them. A security technician arrived 2 minutes later carrying a portable inspection case. He placed the pin beneath a magnifying lamp and examined the seam. "Has this ever been opened?" he asked. "Not with my permission," William answered. The technician inserted a thin instrument beneath the backing. The platinum plate lifted with almost no resistance. Inside the family heirloom sat a black component smaller than a shirt button. A thread-like wire ran toward the upper edge of the pin. Beneath it were a flattened battery and a miniature circuit board. The technician leaned closer. "This is not commercial equipment." "What is it?" Marcus asked. "A microphone, internal storage, and an encrypted transmitter. It has been sending data somewhere outside the building." Eleanor slowly removed her headset. "How much could it have recorded?" "That depends on the battery and the activation settings." The technician connected the device to an isolated reader. Lines of data appeared across the monitor. His face tightened. "It has been active for at least 18 days. William's face lost color. "How is that possible?" "This pin was kept in the safe at my Westchester residence." Marcus summoned the building's security manager, a man named Collins. When Collins entered, he looked first at the opened pin and then at Annie. "Who found it?" "She did," Eleanor said. Collins's gaze moved over Annie's temporary event badge and inexpensive black shoes. Why was she allowed to handle the chairman's personal property? It was part of my assignment, Annie replied. You have worked here for less than a week. Yes, sir. And you immediately recognized a military-grade surveillance device? I recognized an irregular signal and an altered casing. Collins folded his arms. Or you knew where to look because you put it there yourself. Eleanor turned sharply. Marcus remained silent, but all his attention settled on Collins. Heat rose into Annie's face. She kept her hands at her sides. If I had installed it, she said, I would not have warned Mr. Harrington while it was still transmitting. Collins opened his mouth. That is enough, William said. He did not need to raise his voice. Collins stepped back. William looked at Annie longer this time. Her badge still identified her as temporary staff. What made you notice the light? He asked. My father repaired electrical systems for the transit authority. He taught me that equipment usually gives a warning before it fails. Heat, sound, rhythm. Something small. William glanced at the exposed device. This did not fail. No, sir, Annie said, but the person who installed it made one mistake. What mistake? They assumed no one backstage would be paying attention. The technician turned his monitor toward Marcus. The device contains stored audio. We may be able to determine where the live signal was sent, but I need to move it to an isolated laboratory. Marcus issued instructions for preserving the evidence and imposing a complete communications blackout. No one was to contact outside security, the board, or the press without William's approval. Eleanor checked the time. The auditorium has been waiting 12 minutes. William picked up his speech. You are still going out there? She asked. If I cancel now, whoever did this will know we found it. Marcus looked at the empty place on William's lapel. We should replace the pin. Later, William walked toward the door, then stopped beside Annie. What is your full name? Annie Brooks, sir? He repeated it once, as though correcting an omission. Miss Brooks, remain with Miss Price until Marcus speaks with you. Yes, sir. William entered the corridor and walked toward the stage. The applause began before he reached the curtain. He straightened his jacket, stepped into the light, and delivered a speech about trust, growth, and the future of American investment. He did not miss a single prepared line. When he returned backstage 40 minutes later, Marcus was waiting. The door closed behind Annie and Eleanor, leaving William alone with Marcus in the green room. There is something else you need to know. William closed the green room door. Marcus held the service record for the platinum pin. It was sent for maintenance 3 weeks ago. The request came from your brother's office. William stared at the page. Richard personally signed it out, Marcus continued. And according to the executive log, he was the one who brought it back. For the first time that morning, William Harrington lost control of his expression. That does not mean he placed the device inside. No, Marcus said, but it means we have to find out who did. Marcus set the maintenance record on the table. William did not touch it. Who else knew the pin had been sent out? He asked. Richard's assistant, the jeweler, and whoever handled the executive inventory log. The jeweler? Colson and Pierce. Fifth Avenue. They have serviced Harrington family pieces for 30 years. Call the jeweler, he said. I already did. William turned. The pin arrived sealed. Their technician cleaned the outer surface, repaired the clasp, and returned it in the same case. The work order specifically instructed them not to open the backing. Who wrote that instruction? Richard. William looked away again. Marcus waited before speaking. There is another way to know. William understood immediately. You mean the hidden camera in the upper corner, don't you? Marcus saw the uncertainty in William's eyes. Yes, sir. That camera is not connected to the building's network. No one else knows it exists. We may discover something there. Years earlier, after a confidential acquisition file disappeared from his office, William had installed a camera inside the wooden frame of a photograph near the desk. Only 2 people knew it existed. William and Marcus. They crossed the private corridor to William's office. The room had already been sealed from regular staff. Marcus locked the door, closed the blinds, and removed a small drive from a hidden panel behind the photograph. William turned the frame face down. Marcus connected the drive to an isolated laptop. What date did Richard return the pin? 3 weeks ago, Thursday, just after 6 in the evening. Marcus entered the time range. Sir, you need to look at this, Marcus said. The computer screen displayed security footage recorded 3 days earlier at the Harrington residence in Westchester. In the sharp black and white footage, Richard Harrington stood alone beside the desk. He glanced toward the door, waited, then removed a precision instrument from the inner pocket of his jacket. He placed the leather case on the desk and opened it. Inside lay the platinum lapel pin. Richard lifted it under the lamp, inserted the fine tool beneath the backing, and carefully separated the two sections. His movements were controlled and familiar, as though he had practiced them before. From another pocket, he removed a black component smaller than a shirt button and fitted it inside the hollow space. On the screen, Richard connected the device to his phone. He waited. A small light flashed. He checked the result twice, wiped the pin clean with a cloth, and returned it to the case. William froze. He took one step backward until the edge of the desk pressed against his lower back. "He really wants to destroy me," William whispered. Marcus did not answer. There was nothing he could say that the recording had not already said. When the video ended, William sat behind the desk. He placed both hands flat on the wood and stared at the dark screen. "He knew about the summit," Marcus said. "He knew which meetings you would attend and which conversations the pin could capture." William's voice was low. "You are assuming motive. I am describing access. He could have been forced. That is possible. He could be protecting someone. That is also possible." William looked up. "Then stop speaking as if this is finished." Marcus held his gaze. "It is not finished. But the part where we pretend he had nothing to do with it is." William rose so quickly that the chair rolled backward. "I raised him. I know. I sat beside him when he was sick. I signed his school forms. I went to every hearing after he wrecked that car at 17. When our mother died, he would not sleep unless the hall light was on." Marcus did not interrupt. "She asked me to protect him." If William's heartbreak and betrayal touched you, please like this video, comment where you are watching from, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful and heartwarming stories. Marcus moved closer to the desk. "Protecting Richard does not mean protecting every choice he makes." "You do not know what she meant." "No," Marcus said, "but I knew your mother. She did not ask you to become blind." William turned toward him. Marcus continued before he could respond. "We need to preserve the footage, examine Richard's communications, and identify where the signal was going. We also need outside counsel." Quietly. "No suspension. William, no confrontation, no board notice, and no federal contact until we know whether anyone else is involved." Marcus studied him. "You are giving him time. I am giving us time to find the truth. And if he uses that time to destroy evidence, then we make sure he believes nothing has changed." Marcus looked at the empty space on William's lapel. "A replacement. Identical. We can install a controlled transmitter and feed him harmless information." William's face hardened. The idea meant more than an investigation. It meant setting a trap for the boy he had once promised to protect. Before he could answer, there was a quiet knock. Eleanor entered with Annie behind her. "Miss Brooks asked whether you were safe," Eleanor said. She noticed the device could have transmitted more than conversations. "It may have exposed your movements." William looked at Annie. "Why did you think of that? If someone knows where you are meeting, they can also know when you are alone." Marcus gave her a brief nod. "Good observation." William closed the laptop. "Miss Brooks, what happened in this room stays in this room." "Yes, sir. If anyone asks, the summit delay was caused by a microphone failure." "I understand." William studied her for a moment. "An intern from Queens," he said. "Eleanor Price selected you, correct? Why were you brave enough to bring this directly to me?" "Miss Price hired me to work backstage, so I have to value every opportunity and do the best work I can," Annie said. "I was told to remain quiet and avoid drawing attention to myself." She lifted her head. "But I chose to tell you because I respect this company. Working families like mine in Queens depend on the stability of Harrington Global. I could not stand by and let a dirty scheme destroy it." The answer left the room quiet. William had heard senior executives speak for hours about loyalty. Most of them described it in terms of contracts, titles, and compensation. Annie spoke of families who measured corporate stability through rent payments, hospital coverage, and whether a parent still had work on Monday morning. He watched her for a moment. She looked tired now that the immediate danger had passed, but she remained steady. "You may go home. A car will take you. I usually take the subway. Today, you will take the car." Annie seemed ready to object, then looked at Marcus and understood it was not about privilege. Thank you, sir. After she left, Marcus picked up the empty pin case. Do I prepare the replacement? William looked once more at the paused image of Richard standing over the open heirloom. Yes, he said. Let him believe I still trust what I am wearing. The following morning, Richard Harrington entered William's office carrying 2 paper coffee cups from a diner on Lexington Avenue. He wore a charcoal suit, a pale blue tie, and the easy smile of a man visiting someone who had never learned to doubt him. I brought the usual, Richard said. Black coffee for you, too much cream for me. William looked up from the documents on his desk. For 1 second, he saw the 12-year-old boy who used to wait outside his bedroom after their mother died. Then he saw the man in the security recording, holding a precision tool over the platinum pin. You remembered, William said. You have ordered the same coffee for 25 years. Richard placed 1 cup beside William's hand and sat across from him without being invited. His eyes moved briefly over William's jacket. The replacement pin rested on the left lapel. The copy had been completed before dawn. Its platinum surface, engraved shield, and worn clasp were identical to the original. Inside, Marcus's technicians had installed a controlled transmitter that would send only the information William's team chose to provide. Richard's gaze remained on it for less than a second, but William noticed the tension leave his shoulders. How did the summit finish? Richard asked. The investors stayed. That is not what I asked. William lifted the coffee but did not drink. The investment group agreed to continue negotiations. Richard smiled. Then yesterday's technical delay did not frighten them. No. Should it have? Investors become nervous when a billionaire disappears backstage 12 minutes before a major announcement. Richard took a sip of coffee and leaned back. You also left the reception early. People noticed. People always notice when they believe it gives them an advantage. Is that advice for me? It is advice for anyone who needs it. Richard studied him, perhaps searching for anger or suspicion. William offered neither. He had learned long ago that silence forced dishonest men to fill empty spaces themselves. After a moment, Richard opened a leather folder. The shareholders' meeting is 13 days away. Blackridge Capital is asking questions about the expansion plan. The Halston Pension Fund may also reconsider its support. You spoke with them? I speak with everyone. That is why you made me vice chairman for shareholder relations. William glanced at the documents Richard placed before him. You believe you can secure their votes? I believe I can keep them from turning against us. Us, William repeated. Richard's smile remained, but something in his eyes tightened. We are still brothers, William. The words reached farther into William than he wanted them to. Richard knew where to place a memory, just as he knew where to place a listening device. Our mother used to say we were all the other had, Richard continued. She said many things. She expected us to protect each other. William looked directly at him. Protection requires honesty. Richard paused with the cup near his mouth. Is there something you want to ask me? There were 100 questions William wanted to ask. Why had Richard opened the pin? Who was receiving the transmissions? How long had he been planning to remove his brother? Had there been a moment when he almost stopped? Instead, William slid the shareholder reports back across the desk. Not this morning. Richard stood. Get some sleep. You look older than 50. You look pleased about that. I am pleased there is still one thing I can do better than you. He left with his coffee, closing the door softly behind him. Marcus entered from the private corridor less than a minute later. He checked the pin, William said. I saw. The sight of it reassured him. That means the false transmitter is working. William looked at the untouched coffee Richard had brought. Or he wanted me to see him looking. Marcus took the cup and placed it farther from William. Do not drink anything he brings you until this is over. He is my brother, not an assassin. He installed a military-grade listening device in something you wore against your chest. I am not interested in defining the limits of his judgment before we know them. William did not argue. Marcus opened a secure tablet. Outside counsel has approved a preliminary forensic review. Richard's personal accounts are protected, but his corporate travel, expense reports, meeting records, and company communications can be examined under the internal security policy. What have you found? 3 meetings with representatives of Blackridge Capital in the last month. None appeared on his official calendar. Richard meets investors constantly, not through service entrances. William's attention sharpened. Marcus turned the screen toward him. Grainy footage showed Richard entering a restricted backstage corridor during a charity event. A second man followed several minutes later. Jonathan Vale, Marcus said, senior partner at Blackridge. William recognized him. Vale had spent 15 years buying companies, dividing their assets, and selling what remained. Who identified the location? Annie Brooks. William looked up. She mentioned seeing Richard with fund representatives backstage. Marcus continued. Eleanor reviewed her event notes. Annie recorded the time because Vale was not on the guest list. She keeps records? Times, names, doors used, changes in room assignments. Better notes than some of your department heads. William returned his attention to the image. Bring her in. Annie arrived 10 minutes later carrying a clipboard against her chest. She greeted Marcus first, then William. Good morning, Mr. Harrington. Good morning, Miss Brooks. Mr. Reed says you saw my brother meeting Jonathan Vale. Yes, sir. How did you recognize him? I saw his photograph in a financial magazine while preparing the guest reference sheets. Why did the meeting seem unusual? Mr. Vale entered through the vendor corridor instead of the executive lobby. Mr. Richard arrived separately and asked his assistant to keep the area clear. Did you hear what they discussed? No, sir. Did you see anything else? Annie considered the question before answering. Mr. Richard gave him a folded card. It was small, about the size of a hotel key sleeve. Mr. Vale placed it inside his phone case. Marcus wrote down the detail. William asked, "Why did you remember his shoes?" Annie seemed surprised. Eleanor said that was part of your description. They were handmade Italian shoes. The soles had not been worn enough for someone who regularly uses service hallways. William waited. Annie added, "People who work backstage move quickly and watch the floor." Mr. Vale moved slowly and kept watching the doors. A quiet knock interrupted them. A middle manager stepped inside and handed Marcus a revised event file. His eyes passed over Annie. Is the intern still making claims about senior executives? She is answering questions, Marcus said. The manager gave a tight smile. Of course. I only hope we are not rewarding an overly ambitious young woman for creating unnecessary suspicion. Eleanor, who had entered behind him, stopped in the doorway. When a 45-year-old man notices a security problem, we call him attentive, she said. When Miss Brooks notices one, you call her ambitious. Use the same standard. The manager's face reddened. He muttered an apology and left. Annie looked at Eleanor. Thank you. You should not have needed me to say it, Eleanor replied. Marcus's tablet sounded with an encrypted alert. He read the message twice. The Shell Company review has produced something. William stood. What? Blackridge has been purchasing Harrington shares through 6 separate entities. Individually, none of the purchases looked important. And together? Marcus turned the screen. Together, they are approaching 11% of the voting stock. William stared at the number. 11% could not control the company alone, but combined with disloyal board members and frightened institutional investors, it could decide who occupied the chairman's seat. Annie remained near the door, understanding enough from their expressions not to speak. William looked at Marcus. Find every person behind those companies. We have already started. And Richard? We continue as planned. William touched the replacement pin. Somewhere outside the building, his brother believed it was still carrying secrets. For now, William would let him believe it. But the investigation had moved beyond a corrupted family heirloom. Someone was quietly buying the power to take Harrington global from the inside. And the final 11% might already be within reach. That evening, William left Manhattan before the traffic thinned and drove north to the Harrington residence in Westchester. He dismissed the driver at the front steps and entered alone. The house had not changed much since his parents were alive. The stone walls had been restored, the heating system replaced, and the kitchen remodeled twice, but the rooms still held the habits of people who were gone. His mother's piano stood in the library. His father's coat hooks remained near the side entrance, though no coat had hung there in 27 years. William loosened his tie and carried a plate from the kitchen to the breakfast room. Roast chicken, green beans, and potatoes. The cook had left instructions for reheating the meal, but he ate it cold. Beyond the windows, bare branches moved in the November wind. His phone displayed 6 missed calls, including 2 from Richard. William turned it face down. On the sideboard stood the photograph from their mother's funeral. William had brought a copy home after installing the hidden camera in his office. In it, 19-year-old William rested one hand on Richard's shoulder. Richard was 12, thin inside a black jacket borrowed from an older cousin. The house had been full that day. Neighbors carried casseroles through the kitchen. Men from the company spoke softly near the fireplace. Women from the church folded coats and made coffee no one remembered drinking. Richard had sat on the staircase with his tie loosened, staring at the floor. That night, he refused to go to bed unless William left the hallway light on. Their mother's last words had not sounded like a command. She had barely had enough strength to speak. Do not let him grow up believing he has no one. William had spent 31 years answering that request. He had paid Richard's tuition after he was expelled from boarding school. He had hired lawyers after the car accident at 17. He had covered gambling debts at 26 and buried a failed investment at 34 before it reached the board. Each time, William had called it protection. A car moved along the gravel drive. Minutes later, Marcus entered the breakfast room carrying a leather folder. William stood when he came in, an old habit his father had required whenever an older man entered a private room. You have not eaten enough, Marcus said. I have eaten. You moved food around a plate. William gestured toward the chair across from him. Sit down. Marcus placed the folder between them. The shell, company review, is no longer preliminary. William opened it. 6 companies had purchased Harrington stock over 7 months. Their registered addresses led to law offices, mailbox services, and a vacant suite in Delaware. On paper, they were unrelated. In practice, all 6 shared financial advisors connected to Blackridge Capital. How much? William asked. 10.7% as of yesterday. The final purchases? Made within hours of meetings recorded by the device. William turned another page. The transactions followed internal discussions about delayed contracts, expected earnings, and a planned acquisition. Someone had used private information to push the stock down, then buy it at a lower price. Richard could have passed the information without knowing how it would be used. Marcus leaned back. That is still a crime. It is not proof he planned the takeover. No, this is. He removed a second document. It was a confidential voting analysis prepared by one of the outside forensic firms. If Blackridge controlled 11% and persuaded 4 board members to support an emergency motion, William could be removed as chairman at the shareholders' meeting. How many board members are uncertain? William asked. 5. Names? Marcus listed them. One name made William look up. Thomas Keller? Yes. Thomas was with me when we opened the first Ohio plant. He also lost money last year and has been meeting privately with Blackridge. William closed the folder. A meeting is not a purchase. No, but Jonathan Vale paid off a loan held by a company owned by Keller's son. The room became quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock above the fireplace. Marcus continued. We need to contact federal regulators. Not yet. William, we still do not have the full structure. We have surveillance, insider trading patterns, shell companies, and an attempted accumulation of voting power. We do not know whether Richard designed it. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. What evidence would be enough? William stood and walked toward the library. Marcus followed. The photograph from the funeral rested on the table beside the piano. William picked it up. He was 12. He is 43 now. I promised her. You promised your mother that he would not be alone. You did not promise that thousands of employees would stand alone so he could avoid consequences. William's hand tightened around the frame. Marcus's voice remained level. If Richard succeeds, this does not end with your name being removed from an office door. Blackridge will sell divisions, close facilities, and cut pension obligations. People who have spent 30 years on factory floors will be told their retirement was too expensive. William remembered a machinist named Earl Bennett at the company's plant outside Toledo. Earl had worked the night shift for 22 years. During William's first visit as chairman, Earl had invited him to sit in the employee cafeteria and pushed a plate of meatloaf across the table. William's father had later said, "A company is not the sign on the building. It is the mortgage payment made on Friday, because someone had work on Monday." William had not thought of the sentence in years. A knock came at the library door. A housekeeper entered. Mr. Harrington, Miss Brooks is on the secure line. She said she remembered something and was told to call Mr. Reed directly. Marcus answered through the library phone and placed it on speaker. Miss Brooks? Annie's voice came through carefully. I'm sorry to call this late. You were told to report anything relevant, Marcus said. Go ahead. I remembered more of the conversation I heard behind the curtain. William set down the photograph. What exactly? He asked. Annie paused, making sure of the words. Mr. Richards said, as long as the shareholders' meeting goes according to plan, the entire company will belong to me. William closed his eyes. He also said a name, Annie continued, Vale, and something about the final 11%. Then he laughed and said you would never suspect your own brother. The sentence entered the room without force, but it removed the last place William had left to hide. Are you certain? He asked. Yes, sir. I did not understand what it meant then. After what happened today, I thought you should know. William looked at Marcus. Thank you, Miss Brooks. Is there anything else? No. Stay with your mother tonight. Security will remain outside the building. After the call ended, Marcus waited. William returned to the breakfast room and opened the folder again. He looked at the shell companies, the voting projections, and the name of the brother he had protected for most of his life. Preserve everything, he said. Bring in outside counsel. Trace every share and every payment. Keep the replacement pin active. And Richard? No confrontation. Not yet. Marcus nodded. William looked toward the dark window. His reflection stood over the table beside the image of his mother's sons. I kept believing love required me to doubt the evidence, he said. It does not. What does it require? William closed the folder. That I stop him before he destroys what thousands of people spent their lives building. For the first time since the device had been opened, William's voice held no uncertainty. The investigation would continue in silence, but his refusal had ended. By 8 the next morning, Marcus had converted William's private conference room into a war room. Printed ownership charts covered one wall. 6 shell companies were linked by colored lines to Black Ridge Capital, 2 smaller funds, and a law office in Delaware that appeared to exist only on paper. At the center of the diagram, circled in red, was the figure that had kept William awake most of the night, 10.7%. Marcus stood beside the board with outside counsel, a forensic accountant, and a former Securities and Exchange Commission investigator. Annie was not present. William had ordered that she return only to her assigned duties unless Marcus needed her testimony. He would not turn an 18-year-old intern into an investigator simply because the executives around him had failed to notice what she had seen. Explain it without the language you would use in court, William said. The forensic accountant, a gray-haired woman named Rachel Stern, adjusted her glasses. Black Ridge and its partners are buying influence without appearing to act together. Each company owns less than the amount that would attract immediate attention, but when the holdings are combined, they are close to 11%. And 11% gives them what? Not control by itself. It gives them leverage. If Richard has enough board members and institutional investors on his side, that voting bloc can determine the outcome of an emergency motion, removing me as chairman. Yes. Marcus placed another document on the table. The shareholders' meeting is 12 days away. Richard has been contacting investors who control another 14%. William scanned the names: pension funds, insurance companies, family trusts, and 2 longtime directors appeared on the list. These people supported us 6 months ago. They supported stability, Rachel said. Richard is trying to convince them that you are the risk. William looked at her. Using information stolen from my own conversations, using stolen information to predict your moves, weaken negotiations, and make his version of events appear accurate. Marcus opened a second folder. This is what happens if he wins. The first page contained a list of divisions marked for review. The language was neutral. Consolidation, optimization, asset efficiency. William had spent enough years in boardrooms to understand what the words concealed. The Ohio manufacturing facility would be sold. 2 research centers would close. Regional offices in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and North Carolina would be combined or eliminated. The employee scholarship fund would be suspended. Pension obligations would be transferred into a lower-cost structure. How many jobs? William asked. Initial estimate is 12,000, Marcus said. William read the figure again. 12,000 people would not experience Richard's victory as a change in corporate leadership. They would experience it at kitchen tables, in mortgage offices, at pharmacy counters, and in conversations with spouses who had believed retirement was finally close enough to touch. Rachel pointed to a paragraph near the bottom. Black Ridge intends to load the company with debt after the asset sales. Richard would remain chairman in name, but the funds would control the major decisions. William looked up. He is not taking the company. No, Marcus said. He is helping them divide it. William pushed back from the table and walked to the window. Below, Midtown had entered its morning rhythm. Delivery drivers unloaded cartons. Office workers carried coffee through revolving doors. A sanitation truck stopped beside the curb while two men in reflective jackets lifted bags into the rear compartment. The scale of the conspiracy was measured in billions, but the consequences would arrive one paycheck at a time. Years earlier, William had visited the Harrington plant outside Toledo with his father. He had been 22, impatient, and more interested in the quarterly numbers than the people producing them. At lunch, his father had taken him into the employee cafeteria instead of the executive dining room. A machinist named Earl Bennett had moved his lunch tray aside and made space for them. Earl had worked the night shift for 22 years. He spoke about his daughter's nursing program, his wife's arthritis, and the mortgage he had finally paid off. Before they left, William's father had said, "A company is not the name above the door. It is the mortgage payment made on Friday because someone had work on Monday." At the time, William had thought the sentence was sentimental. Now it felt like an accusation. A knock sounded at the conference room door. Eleanor entered carrying a tablet. "Richard has scheduled an employee town hall for noon," she said. "He says he wants to reassure staff about market rumors." "Who approved it?" William asked. "He did. Vice Chairman Authority." Marcus gave a dry look. "He creates the fear, then volunteers to calm it." William returned to the table. "Let him speak." Eleanor hesitated. "The communications team believes silence from you may be interpreted as weakness." "Then let them interpret it." At noon, the company cafeteria had been rearranged for the town hall. Employees stood along the walls and watched from the upper balcony. Richard took the small stage without notes. He wore a navy suit similar to William's and spoke with the ease of someone who had practiced sounding sincere. "Harrington Global has survived recessions, political uncertainty, and changes in technology," he told them. "We survived because we are a family, and families do not abandon one another when rumors begin." The audience applauded. William watched from behind a glass partition near the service corridor. Marcus stood beside him. Richard continued. "No one should be worried about pensions, jobs, or the future of this company. My brother and I are united in our commitment to every employee." William's expression remained still. "He is promising them protection from the plan he signed," Marcus said. "He knows the truth sounds strongest when it is placed beside a lie." Across the cafeteria, Annie helped the event staff carry boxes of printed material. She moved quietly, checking guest badges and directing employees toward open seats. Richard's speech did not appear to distract her. Then she stopped. Near the rear entrance, Jonathan Vale was speaking with two men wearing visitor badges. Neither appeared on Eleanor's approved list. One was a representative of the Halston Pension Fund. The other served on the advisory committee of a large insurance group. Annie did not approach them. She checked the time on the wall clock and wrote it on her event sheet. A senior stagehand named Mr. Lewis struggled with a case of audio cables. Annie crossed to help him. "You have enough to do," he said. "So do you." He let her take one side. "Young people usually walk past before an old man finishes asking. My mother says you should say good morning before you ask anyone for something." Mr. Lewis smiled. "Your mother sounds sensible. She is a nurse. Sensible is how she keeps people alive." They carried the case behind the curtain. From there, Annie could still see Vale. He handed one of the visitors a folded document. Richard continued speaking about loyalty while the exchange took place less than 40 feet behind him. Annie found Eleanor and quietly reported what she had seen. Eleanor checked the official guest list. None of them were scheduled to be here. "Mr. Vale used the catering entrance again," Annie said. Eleanor looked toward the rear of the room. "Stay here." She informed Marcus, who sent a member of the forensic team to photograph the visitors and note their departure times. After the town hall, Richard moved through the cafeteria shaking hands. Employees thanked him for reassuring them. An older woman from payroll told him her husband had retired from the Ohio plant and depended on the pension. Richard placed a hand over hers. "You have my word," he said. "Nothing will happen to it." William heard the promise from across the room. For the first time, the betrayal felt larger than anything Richard had done to him. His brother was looking people in the eye and using their fear to secure the power required to harm them. Marcus's phone vibrated. He read the message, then turned the screen toward William. One of the visitors had agreed to support an emergency no-confidence motion. Another board member was considering the same offer. The 11% is only the beginning, Marcus said. William watched Richard accept another employee's gratitude. Then we find every vote he has bought, he replied, and we show them what their support will cost. At that moment, Richard looked across the cafeteria and met William's eyes. He smiled and lifted one hand in a brotherly greeting. William returned the gesture. Neither man looked away first. The following morning, Annie arrived at Harrington Tower 20 minutes before her shift. She carried a paper cup of coffee in one hand and her event binder in the other. The lobby was quieter than usual, but the security desk had already received new instructions. Bag on the table, Collins said. Annie stopped. Employees passed through the turnstiles around her. Most were waved through after tapping their badges. Collins did not ask any of them to open a bag. Is there a problem? She asked. A confidential scheduling document disappeared from the executive events office last night. I wasn't in that office last night. The access log says your badge was used at 6:42. Annie remembered the time immediately. Eleanor had sent her to retrieve a presentation remote before the town hall. She had entered, found it in the second drawer, and left less than 2 minutes later. Miss Price asked me to pick up a clicker. Collins extended his hand. The bag. Several employees slowed as they walked past. No one stopped completely, but Annie could feel them listening. She placed the binder and her canvas work bag on the table. I want Miss Price present. Collins frowned. This is a routine inspection. Then waiting for my supervisor should not be a problem. His mouth tightened, but he called Eleanor. She arrived 5 minutes later, still fastening the cuff of her coat. What happened? Collins explained that a printed copy of William's private schedule was missing. The document listed meetings, travel times, and restricted entrances for the coming shareholders' week. And you believe Annie took it? Eleanor asked. I said her badge accessed the room. So did mine. You are the department director. That answers my question. Collins looked toward Annie's bag. We need to determine whether company property left the building. Eleanor turned to Annie. Are you comfortable allowing the search with me here? No, Annie said, but I understand refusing will be used against me. The honesty unsettled Eleanor. Collins opened the bag. Inside were a notebook, a phone charger, lip balm, 2 pens, Calvin Brooks's small screwdriver kit, and a paperback book on organizational security. He examined every pocket, then opened the binder and shook it over the table. Nothing fell out. He checked her coat and asked her to empty her pockets. Annie placed a Metro card, $3, and a folded grocery receipt beside the bag. Collins stared at the empty table. Nothing, Eleanor said. Are we finished? For now. Annie put her belongings away. Will you search everyone else who entered the room? We will follow procedure. That wasn't my question. Collins looked past her. You may report to work. Annie picked up her coffee. It had gone cold. By 9 o'clock, the missing document had become a rumor. No official accusation had been made. But 2 event assistants stopped talking when Annie entered the equipment room. A senior coordinator asked whether she had been cleared. Another suggested she remain away from confidential areas until management understood what happened. Annie kept working. She checked microphones, replaced batteries, updated seating cards, and logged each task with the exact time. Her father had taught her to record electrical repairs because memory became unreliable when people needed someone to blame. Near noon, she entered the staff kitchen and heard a manager named Paul Hensley speaking to another employee. She has been here a week, and suddenly she is involved in executive security, private meetings, and missing files. That is a lot of attention for one intern. Annie set her lunch container in the refrigerator. Hensley glanced at her. We were discussing general procedure. No, you were discussing me. He gave a small laugh. You are ambitious. That is not necessarily an insult. Would you call me ambitious if I had stayed quiet about the pin? I would call that knowing your place. The room went still. Eleanor had entered behind Annie. She closed the door. What place is that, Paul? Hensley straightened. I meant her professional role. No, you meant the place where her observations do not make senior people uncomfortable. That is not fair. Eleanor looked at him. When a middle-aged executive notices a risk, you call him experienced. When Annie notices one, you call her ambitious. When a document disappears, you search her bag before questioning the people who created the document. Do not use the word fair until you are prepared to apply it. Hensley left without finishing his coffee. Annie opened the refrigerator. then closed it again. "Thank you," she said. Eleanor leaned against the counter. "You should not have needed me to say it." "No, I should have stopped the search before it started." Annie met her eyes. "You believed me after they found nothing. That is not the same as believing me before they searched." Eleanor accepted the sentence without defending herself. "You're right." A message arrived on her phone. William wanted to see both of them. They entered his office 10 minutes later. Marcus stood near the window, holding the missing schedule in a clear evidence sleeve. "Where was it?" Eleanor asked. "Inside Richard's conference room," Marcus said. "A cleaning supervisor found it beneath a cabinet." Annie looked at William. "Was my badge the only one checked?" "No," William said, though the pause before his answer revealed that the broader review had begun only after Eleanor intervened. He turned to Collins, who stood near the door. "How many executives were searched when confidential documents disappeared during the last 5 years?" Collins said nothing. "How many?" "No, sir." "Why was Miss Brooks searched?" "Her badge appeared in the access log. So did Miss Price's. So did Mr. Hensley's. So did my brother's assistant's." Collins shifted his weight. "Miss Brooks is new. We did not know her background." William's voice remained even. "You knew enough about her background to assume it was a risk." Collins looked down. William ordered him to provide all security records to an outside review team and removed him from the investigation. When Collins left, William faced Annie. "What happened this morning should not have happened." She waited. "I am sorry." "Thank you, sir." It was polite, but it was not absolution. William understood the difference. "The document was placed in Richard's conference room after someone copied it," Marcus said. "We believe the disappearance was meant to create a reason to investigate Annie and remove her access." "Why me?" Annie asked. Marcus looked at William before answering. "Because Richard has noticed that you are paying attention." Eleanor's phone rang. She stepped aside, listened, then turned back. Human Resources received an anonymous complaint accusing Annie of mishandling executive property. Someone also contacted her school counselor and suggested her internship record may be under review. Annie's face changed for the first time that day. "My college applications use that counselor's recommendation." William's jaw tightened. "We will correct the record." "It is already a record," Annie said. "Even when people remove an accusation, they remember hearing it." No one contradicted her. Marcus placed another file on the desk. "There is more. Someone accessed Miss Brooks's employment paperwork last night. They viewed her home address, emergency contact, and her mother's workplace." Annie's fingers closed around the edge of her binder. At that moment, her phone vibrated. Her mother's name appeared on the screen. Annie answered. Helen Brooks did not greet her. Her voice was low and frightened. "Annie, come home." "What happened?" "A man called the hospital. He said your internship was putting our family in danger." William and Marcus could hear every word in the quiet office. Helen continued, "I do not care about the job. I do not care about the company. Come home now." Annie looked toward the window, where the city stretched beyond the glass, full of people who could be harmed by decisions made inside this building. For the first time since she had seen the light beneath the pin, she wanted to walk away. And this time, the threat was no longer aimed at her future. It had found her mother. Marcus arranged for a company car to take Annie home, but she asked to ride with Eleanor instead. She did not want a driver she had never met knowing where her mother lived. Eleanor understood and said nothing about the request. Queens looked different from the back seat of a black corporate sedan. The neighborhood had not changed, but Annie felt as though she had brought something dangerous home with her. Grocery stores, laundromats, and narrow apartment buildings passed beneath gray afternoon light. People carried shopping bags, pushed strollers, and waited for buses without knowing that her name had appeared inside a fight over billions of dollars. Helen was waiting in the lobby when they arrived. She still wore navy hospital scrubs beneath her winter coat. Her hair had been pulled into a loose knot, and there were shadows beneath her eyes from the overnight shift. She crossed the lobby and took Annie by both shoulders. "Are you hurt?" "No, Mom." "Did anyone follow you?" "Security checked." Helen looked past her at Eleanor. "You are her supervisor?" "Yes." "Eleanor Price, the woman who hired her?" "Yes." Helen released Annie and straightened. "Then come upstairs. I want to understand why someone called my hospital and knew my daughter's name." The apartment was warm and smelled faintly of coffee and laundry detergent. College brochures covered one end of the kitchen table. A church calendar hung beside the refrigerator. Calvin Brooks's old radio sat on a shelf near the window, its wooden case worn smooth at the corners. Helen put water on the stove, though no one had asked for tea. Eleanor explained only what she was authorized to share. A security issue had occurred at the company. Annie had reported something important. Certain people might want her to remain silent. Harrington Global had arranged legal protection and temporary security. Helen listened without interrupting. When Eleanor finished, she asked, "Did my daughter do anything wrong?" "No." "Then why was her bag searched?" Annie looked down. Eleanor did not avoid the question, because people made an assumption they would not have made about several senior employees. Helen's mouth tightened, so they accused her first and started thinking later. "Yes. And now the same company wants me to trust its security? That concern is fair. Fair does not keep a stranger from calling my job." Eleanor accepted the words. "No, it does not." She placed her card on the table, along with the number of an independent attorney retained for Annie. She explained that no one would require Annie to return until she chose to. After Eleanor left, Helen locked the door, checked it twice, and closed the curtains. Annie removed her coat. "You did not have to speak to her that way." "Yes, I did." She apologized. Apologies are important, so are locked doors. Helen opened the refrigerator and took out 2 turkey sandwiches from a diner near the hospital. She warmed potato soup on the stove and placed 2 slices of apple pie on the counter for later. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, where Annie had completed homework, filled out scholarship forms, and learned how to calculate household expenses. Helen pushed the soup toward her. "Eat." "I'm not hungry." Fear feels worse on an empty stomach. Annie took a spoonful. For several minutes, they ate without speaking. The radiator clicked. A bus sighed to a stop outside, then pulled away. Helen set down her spoon. "You are leaving that internship." Annie had expected the sentence, but it still hurt. "Mom, no. I have worked too many night shifts to watch you become a target for men who can ruin a person before breakfast. If I leave now, they get exactly what they want." "You are 18. I know how old I am." "Then act like you have a future worth protecting." Annie looked toward the college brochures. "That future will not mean much if I learn to walk away every time someone powerful makes me afraid." Helen leaned back. "You think this is about courage? It is about what happens when courage meets people with lawyers, private security, and money you cannot count. I did not ask to be involved, but you are involved, and involvement has a price." Annie's voice dropped. "So I should pretend I did not see anything? I am saying the truth does not always protect the person carrying it." The old radio crackled on the shelf. Both women turned. The set had belonged to Calvin. He had bought it at a churchyard sale and spent 3 weekends repairing it with Annie at the kitchen table. After his death, she kept it working even though they could have streamed every station through a phone. Annie stood and adjusted the dial. The crackling continued. She removed the back panel and took Calvin's small screwdriver kit from her work bag. Helen watched her tighten a loose connection. "Your father would tell you to leave," she said. "No, he would tell me to check the wiring first." Despite herself, Helen almost smiled. The radio cleared. An older jazz singer filled the kitchen with a low, worn voice. Annie set down the screwdriver. "Dad used to say most failures whisper before they break." He was talking about electrical systems. He was talking about paying attention. Helen folded her arms. "Paying attention does not mean standing in front of danger. No, it means not pretending the warning is harmless." Annie told her everything she could without violating Marcus's instructions. The strange light, the search, the phone call she had overheard, the missing schedule, and the threat to employee pensions and jobs. She did not mention names beyond those already known to Helen. "People may lose their work because of this," Annie said. "Not executives with savings accounts. Families who need health insurance." Helen looked at her hospital badge lying on the table. "You think that company would protect us if the situation were reversed? Maybe not. Then why are you protecting it?" "I am not protecting a building or a billionaire. I am protecting the people who will never be invited into those meetings." Helen's anger did not disappear, but it changed shape. For years, she had taught Annie practical rules. Keep every receipt, speak clearly to security, never reach into a bag without explaining, call when leaving work, do not give anyone an excuse to misunderstand you. Those lessons had kept her safe more than once. They had also taught her daughter that being noticed could be dangerous. Helen rubbed both hands over her face. I spent 18 years teaching you how not to become a target. You taught me how to come home. I may have taught you too much about surviving and not enough about standing up. Annie reached across the table. I am scared. You should be. That does not mean I am wrong. No. Helen took her hand. Then we do this carefully. No following people. No opening files. No meeting anyone alone. You document everything. And you call me before you decide to be brave. Annie let out a breath she had been holding since the hospital call. Does that mean I can go back? It means I cannot stop you without teaching you the wrong lesson. The phone rang before Annie could answer. Their pastor was calling. Someone from the hospital had told a church member about the threatening call, and news had traveled through the congregation faster than either of them expected. By evening, a retired teacher had offered to help with Annie's college applications. An older deacon had volunteered to drive Helen to work, and 2 women from the church had brought a tray of baked macaroni and cornbread. The danger had reached their home, but so had the community. Before bed, Annie returned Calvin's screwdriver to her work bag. Helen stood in the doorway. If you go back tomorrow, you go because you decided the truth was worth the risk, not because Mr. Harrington needs you to save him. I know, and if anyone asks you to do something unsafe, I call Marcus. Then you. Me first. Annie smiled for the first time that day. You first. The next morning, she put on her white backstage shirt, buttoned her coat, and placed the work badge around her neck. Fear went with her to the door. It simply did not get to decide where she went. Annie returned to Harrington Tower shortly after 8. Marcus had arranged for a car, but she asked to be dropped 1 block away. She wanted a few minutes to walk, breathe, and enter the building on her own terms. The guards at the lobby desk addressed her by name. One of them opened the turnstile without asking to inspect her bag. The courtesy felt less like respect than an attempt to correct yesterday's mistake before anyone mentioned it. Eleanor met her near the private elevators. You did not have to come back today. I know. Your mother agreed? She agreed that she could not lock me inside the apartment. Eleanor almost smiled. That sounds like a mother's version of permission. She also said I should call her before I decide to be brave. That sounds like good advice. Annie's morning assignment involved preparing a private conference room for a group of institutional investors. She checked the name cards, tested the presentation screen, and verified that the correct financial packets had been placed at each seat. Marcus had instructed her to remain within her assigned duties, document anything unusual, and contact him rather than investigate on her own. At 10:15, Richard's assistant approached. Mr. Harrington would like to see you. Annie looked toward Eleanor. Which Mr. Harrington? She asked. The assistant's expression tightened. Mr. Richard Harrington. Where? Conference room 12. Annie knew the room. It was small, private, and located beyond the executive dining area. Will anyone else be present? He requested a brief conversation. Annie took out her phone and sent a message to Eleanor and Marcus before following him. She included the room, number, and time. Conference room 12 had no windows. A polished table occupied most of the space, and framed photographs of Harrington facilities lined the walls. Richard stood near a coffee service with his jacket unbuttoned. Miss Brooks, he said, thank you for coming. Annie remained near the door. Your assistant said you wanted to speak with me. I wanted to meet the young woman everyone seems to be discussing. He gestured toward a chair. I prefer to stand. Richard smiled. Of course. He poured himself coffee and added a small amount of cream. His movements were casual, but Annie noticed that the door had closed behind his assistant. You made quite an impression during your first week, he said. Most interns spend their time carrying folders and learning where the restrooms are. I have done some of that too. And yet you have already gained access to my brother, Marcus Reed, and private security meetings. I reported a safety concern. A remarkable one. Richard sat at the head of the table. You are planning to attend college next fall? Yes. Engineering, technology, and organizational risk, if I can afford the right program. I understand your mother works nights at Queen's Memorial. Annie did not respond. She has medical debt from a surgery 2 years ago. Your family also has an outstanding balance on your apartment lease. How do you know that? Richard rested one hand on the table. Companies perform background reviews. You should not be alarmed. My mother's hospital debt has nothing to do with my internship. No, but it has a great deal to do with opportunity. He opened a folder and turned it toward her. Inside was a letter offering full tuition at a private university, a paid position at a Blackridge-affiliated foundation, and housing assistance in Manhattan. The numbers were greater than anything Annie had imagined earning in several years. "This is not a formal offer yet," Richard said. "But I can make it one." "What would I have to do?" "Nothing improper. You would simply clarify that you may have misunderstood certain conversations and events." "Which conversations?" The kind an inexperienced employee could easily interpret without context. Annie looked at the tuition figure again, then at Richard. "You want me to say I was wrong? I want you to avoid being used in a family disagreement that has nothing to do with you. You investigated my mother before deciding that? I learned enough to know you deserve better than a temporary badge and a subway ride from Queens." Annie closed the folder. "My mother deserves not to have strangers search through her debts." Richard's smile weakened. "You are young, Miss Brooks. Young people often confuse attention with respect. William notices you now because you are useful. When this crisis ends, he will return to people who belong in his world. And you noticed me because I became dangerous to yours." For the first time, Richard's expression emptied. He stood and walked around the table. "This company forgets interns every season. Their names disappear from directories. Their badges stop working. And no one asks why." Annie held his gaze even as her pulse climbed. "Then you would not need to threaten me. I am advising you." "No. Advice gives someone a choice without punishing them for the answer." Richard stopped several feet away. "You believe my brother will protect you?" "I believe I have already told Mr. Reed where I am." A brief silence followed. Annie continued. "And executive conference rooms are monitored under company policy." Richard glanced toward the ceiling. The movement was small, but she saw it. "You may go," he said. Annie opened the door. Her hand trembled against the handle, so she tightened her grip until it stopped. Richard spoke before she stepped out. "The offer will not remain available." She looked back. "Neither will my silence." Annie walked into the corridor without running. She reached the emergency stairwell, pushed through the door, and sat on the third step. Only then did her hands begin to shake. She called Eleanor first, then Marcus, then her mother. Helen answered on the second ring. "Are you safe?" "Yes." "Did you do anything brave without calling me?" "I called as soon as it was over. That was not our agreement." "I know." Helen exhaled. "We will discuss that tonight. Keep talking until someone you trust reaches you." Eleanor arrived less than 2 minutes later. Marcus followed with a security officer William had personally approved. Annie described the meeting word for word. She separated what Richard had said from what she believed he meant, just as Marcus had taught her. "The room records executive meetings," Marcus said. "We will preserve the file." "Will it prove he is behind everything?" Annie asked. "No, but it proves he attempted to influence a witness and used private family information to do it." William entered the stairwell before Marcus finished. His face showed the anger he had refused to reveal in front of Richard. "I will confront him now." "No," Marcus said. "He threatened her, and if you act now, he destroys records, warns Blackridge, and claims the conversation was a scholarship offer." William turned to Annie. "You should never have been placed in that room alone. I told you where I was going. That does not make it acceptable." Annie rose from the step. "Do not damage the case to defend my feelings, Mr. Harrington. Finish what we started." William looked at her for several seconds. Senior executives had spent years telling him what they believed he wanted to hear. Annie, frightened and still shaking, had told him what he needed to hear. Marcus's phone vibrated. He read the message and looked at William. "Our forensic team found a draft agreement between Richard and Blackridge." William's attention shifted. "What kind of agreement?" "The kind that explains what happens after he takes your chair." Marcus turned the screen toward him. The first page contained a list of Harrington divisions marked for sale, closure, or restructuring. At the bottom was an estimate of 12,000 eliminated positions. William read the number twice. Richard had tried to purchase Annie's silence with tuition and security. Now the document revealed where that money would come from. It would come from closed plants, reduced pensions, canceled scholarships, and thousands of families who would be told there was no longer a place for them in the company they had helped build. William took the draft agreement from Marcus and walked back into the conference room without speaking. Annie, Eleanor, and Marcus followed. The document lay open across the table, its language neat and bloodless. operational consolidation, pension restructuring, asset efficiency, regional workforce reduction. William read the phrases in silence. Richard had always preferred language that removed people from the consequences of a decision. A plant did not close. It was consolidated. A pension was not cut. It was restructured. 12,000 workers were not dismissed. The workforce was reduced. Rachel Stern joined them by secure video from the forensic team's office. "The agreement is authentic," she said. "The metadata links it to a Blackridge server." Richard's office edited 3 sections last week. "What sections?" William asked. "Executive authority, asset, sale timing, and his compensation package." Marcus turned a page toward him. Richard would receive the chairmanship, a large block of protected shares, and a guaranteed payment if the company was broken apart within 2 years. William stared at the signature line bearing his brother's name. He sold the company before he owned it. He sold what he expected to control, Rachel said. Eleanor read the list of proposed cuts. "The employee scholarship program is here." Annie looked over her shoulder. The Harrington Community Scholarship helped the children of hourly workers attend college. She had applied for it before receiving the internship, though she had not told anyone in the room. "How many students depend on that program?" William asked. 412 this year, Eleanor said. "More next fall." Annie kept her eyes on the page. Richard had offered to pay for her education in private while planning to eliminate the fund that gave hundreds of other students the same chance. William noticed her expression. "You applied for it?" "Yes, sir." "Why didn't you mention that before?" "Because it should not matter more because I am standing here." The answer struck him harder than the number on the page. Annie was right. A policy did not become human only when one of its victims entered the room. Marcus closed the door. "This is enough to notify federal investigators." William did not answer immediately. He walked to the window and looked down at the avenue. A delivery truck was parked beside the curb. 2 workers moved crates through the service entrance, while office employees passed them without looking. His father had spent years teaching him that ownership was not the same as stewardship. William had repeated the lesson in speeches, annual reports, and employee meetings. Yet somewhere along the way, he had started treating the company as something only the Harrington family could save or destroy. Richard had made the opposite mistake. He believed the company belonged to him because his last name was attached to it. William thought of Earl Bennett in the Toledo cafeteria, sliding over a plate of meatloaf and explaining how a steady paycheck had put his daughter through nursing school. William remembered his father waiting until they were back in the car before speaking. "A company is not the sign above the door," he had said. "It is the mortgage payment made on Friday because someone had work on Monday." At 22, William had considered it an old man's sentiment. At 50, he understood it as a warning. "Contact them," he said. Marcus did not move. "Federal investigators?" "Yes," quietly. "Through outside counsel?" Rachel nodded on the screen. "I will prepare the evidence package." William turned back to Marcus. "We protect the pension fund first. We can place emergency restrictions on asset transfers. And the scholarship program. That will require board approval. Then move the funds into an independent trust before the meeting. Lawfully." Rachel made a note. "We can review the governing documents." William looked at Annie. No one should be able to trade one young person's future for another's silence. Annie gave a small nod. But she did not thank him. This was not a gift. It was a correction. That afternoon, William traveled to the Westchester residence. He brought no security inside and asked the staff to leave the library undisturbed. Margaret Harrington's piano stood near the windows. Her music books remained in the bench, though no one had opened them in years. William sat beside it, nodded the keys, and placed the draft agreement on the closed lid. Marcus entered 20 minutes later. "You wanted to speak privately." William pointed to the chair across from him. "When Richard was 16, he stole money from the school athletics fund." Marcus remembered. "You repaid it." "I told the headmaster it was an accounting mistake." "Yes." At 26, he lost nearly $500,000 gambling. "You settled the debt." At 34, he invested company money in a project he knew had failed. "You moved the loss into another division before the board saw it." William looked toward the family photograph on the mantel. "Every time he fell, I removed the ground before he could hit it. You thought you were keeping your promise. I was keeping myself from feeling like I had failed our mother." Marcus leaned forward. "Those are not the same thing." William's voice lowered. I wanted him to know he was not alone. He knew. He also learned that consequences would never reach him while you were standing nearby. The truth settled between them without anger. William remembered Richard after the car accident at 17, blood on his collar, repeating that he had ruined everything. William had held his shoulders and said, "I will take care of it." He had meant the lawyers, the repairs, the school, the newspapers. Richard may have heard something else. "You will never have to carry what you do." William stood and moved toward the window. "I spent 31 years protecting him from every small consequence." Marcus remained seated. And now? Now he believes he can destroy 12,000 lives and call it inheritance. Marcus waited. William looked at the bare trees beyond the glass. Justice is not unfair because it hurts someone we love. It becomes unfair when love is used to excuse the harm they caused. It was the first time he had said the thought aloud. Marcus rose. "Then we proceed." "Yes. With the federal team, the controlled transmitter, and the shareholders meeting?" "Yes. And if the evidence leads directly to Richard?" William looked back at the photograph. "Then I stopped trying to save him from the truth." By evening, the plan had taken shape. The replacement pin would continue transmitting selected information. Richard would hear that William had lost board support, that emergency financing had failed, and that resignation was being considered. The lies would be specific enough to feel real but harmless enough to protect the company. Outside counsel would preserve every recording. Federal investigators would monitor the financial activity. Marcus would trace the shell companies, voting agreements, and payments. Eleanor would control event access and document every unscheduled visitor. Annie would return to her regular backstage duties. When Marcus explained this, she asked, "You do not want me helping with the investigation? I want you alive, credible, and within the law," he said. "You observe, you document, you report. You do not follow anyone, open restricted files, or meet Richard alone." "I understand. Facts first, conclusions later." Annie opened her notebook. Marcus pointed to the page. "Exact time, exact place, exact words. Separate what you saw from what you think it means." "That sounds less dramatic." "It is also how truth survives a courtroom." William entered as Marcus finished. "The investigators have agreed to the operation," he said. "Richard believes I am weakening." Annie looked at the replacement pin on his lapel. "Will he believe the information?" "He wants to believe it. That can make a lie easier to hear." William gave her a measured look. "Yes, Miss Brooks." "It can." Marcus's secure phone vibrated. He read the message. "Richard just contacted Jonathan Vale. He told him to prepare the voting group. He believes William may resign before the meeting." William touched the edge of the false pin. For the first time, Richard was no longer listening to secrets. He was listening to a story designed for him. And because it told him exactly what he wanted to hear, he had begun to move. The controlled operation began the next morning in a conference room 3 floors below William's office. The location had been chosen because Richard rarely visited it, and because its communication system could be isolated from the rest of Harrington Tower. Marcus stood at the head of the table with Rachel Stern, 2 outside attorneys, Eleanor, and a pair of federal investigators introduced only by their last names. Annie sat near the end with her notebook closed in front of her. William entered last, wearing the replacement pin. One of the investigators, Agent Monroe, looked at the lapel before looking at William. "The transmitter is active?" Marcus checked the monitor. "Yes. And your brother still believes it is the original device?" "He checked it yesterday," William said. He appeared satisfied. Monroe placed a folder on the table. "Then we need discipline. No improvised conversations. No false information that could affect the market. Nothing suggesting a real acquisition, financing event, or government decision." William took his seat. "What can we give him?" "Information about your internal position," Rachel said. "Your confidence, your board support, and your intentions. Those are believable and less likely to harm outside investors." Marcus displayed the plan on the screen. Over the next 4 days, Richard would hear selected conversations suggesting that William's position was weakening. The false story would be built slowly. A major lender would appear hesitant. 2 directors would appear ready to abandon William. The expansion agreement would seem close to delay. William would seem tired enough to consider resignation rather than suffer a public defeat. "The lies cannot arrive all at once," Marcus said. Richard is intelligent. If we hand him everything he wants in a single afternoon, he may question it. William looked at the sequence. He has waited years for this. He will hear patience as proof. Rachel nodded. That is what we are counting on. Annie raised a hand slightly. Monroe glanced toward her. Yes, Miss Brooks? If Mr. Richard has been listening for 18 days, he may know how people normally speak around Mr. Harrington. If everyone suddenly sounds as if they are performing, he will notice. The room became quiet. Marcus looked at William. She is right. Monroe asked, what do you suggest? Annie chose her words carefully. Do not make each conversation about the same problem. Let ordinary things happen around it. Someone should ask about lunch. A phone should ring. Mr. Harrington should disagree with people instead of accepting every bad report. Real conversations are untidy. Eleanor smiled faintly. That is the most useful note anyone has given us this morning. William looked toward Annie. Anything else? The information should not make you sound helpless. Mr. Richard knows you. If he believes you have simply given up, he may suspect a trap. William leaned back. So he needs to believe I am still fighting. Yes, sir. Just losing. Agent Monroe closed his folder. We used that. The first staged conversation took place before lunch. William and Marcus met in the private office while the controlled transmitter remained active. A technician monitored the signal from the secure room below. Marcus placed a genuine report on William's desk, though the discussion surrounding it was carefully planned. The Halston Pension Fund has requested another meeting, Marcus said. William turned a page. They met with us last week. They are reconsidering their position. Because of Richard? Because they believe the board may remove you. William stood and walked toward the window. The silence lasted long enough to sound natural. How many directors remain firm? He asked. Fewer than we expected. William let irritation enter his voice. That is not an answer. 5 are reliable. 3 are uncertain. The others will follow whichever side appears strongest. A phone rang on Marcus's desk. He answered, listened, and then said, Tell the kitchen I will have the soup. Mr. Harrington will not eat until someone puts food in front of him. William gave him an annoyed look. Marcus ended the call. You asked for natural conversation. This is natural. It is also unnecessary. The technician later confirmed that the transmission had been received and forwarded outside the building. 2 hours afterward, Richard called Jonathan Vale. Federal investigators recorded the contact through a court-authorized channel connected to the Blackridge inquiry. He is losing Halston, Richard said. Vale's voice came through the secure speaker in the operations room. Are you certain? I heard Reed admit it. William may be feeding you something. Richard dismissed the concern. He does not know the device exists. Annie sat beside Eleanor, listening without expression. Vale continued. If Halston shifts, we still need Keller and the insurance group. I will handle Keller. And William? He is holding on because he does not know how to do anything else. By the meeting, holding on will make him look desperate. Richard sounded calmer than he had in previous calls. The false information had not merely reassured him. It had made him careless. Marcus paused the recording. He believes the first piece, he said. William looked at the speaker. He wants the second. The next day, Eleanor staged a scheduling dispute in William's green room. She informed him, within range of the pin, that 2 major investors had requested private meetings with Richard instead of the chairman. William objected. Eleanor told him the request could not be reversed without creating more concern. Annie entered halfway through the conversation carrying corrected seating charts, just as planned. She did not speak until Eleanor asked whether the board dinner arrangements were complete. One place is still unconfirmed, Annie said. Whose? Mr. Keller's. William looked at Marcus. Put him beside me, William said. He asked to sit near Mr. Richard, Annie replied. The detail was false, but plausible. Thomas Keller had been William's friend for nearly 3 decades, and Richard knew the loss would hurt him. William waited before answering, then give him what he asked for. When the exchange ended, Annie left the room and returned to the secure floor. Her palms were damp. Marcus noticed. You did well. I only read 1 line. You read it without trying to sound important. That is harder than people think. He placed a blank observation form before her. Now document exactly what happened. Annie wrote the time, location, people present, wording, and her own role. Marcus pointed to the final section. Do not write that Richard believed the conversation. But he probably did. Probably is not a fact. Write what we can prove. She corrected the sentence. You make everything sound less dramatic, she said. That is how evidence survives after the drama ends. By late afternoon, Richard had contacted 2 board members and urged them to move against William before he recovered his position. He also instructed Vail to complete the final share purchases before the market closed on Friday. The investigators now had confirmation that the listening device remained part of an active conspiracy. That evening, William met Richard in the executive dining room. They ate grilled salmon, potatoes, and green beans at the same table where their father had once hosted visiting bankers. Richard poured wine for both of them. You look tired, he said. I have had a difficult week. You do not have to carry everything alone. William nearly laughed at the cruelty of the sentence. Instead, he cut into the salmon. Is that an offer? It is a reminder that I am here. Richard's gaze moved toward the replacement pin. William saw it. Some directors may request an emergency motion, Richard said. If they do, I can help you manage the room. Why would they listen to you? Because I am not the one they are preparing to remove. The answer was too direct to be accidental. William set down his fork. You sound certain. I sound prepared. For several seconds, the brothers looked at each other across the table. Then William said, Preparation is useful when a man understands what he is preparing for. Richard smiled. I learned that from you. Later, the controlled transmitter captured Richard placing another call to Vail. He knows he is finished, Richard said. He is trying to hide it behind threats. Vail asked, Do we have the votes? We will. And the final 11%? Complete the purchases. The company will never be this vulnerable again. Marcus stopped the recording and looked at William. He has taken the bait. William removed the replacement pin and placed it on the table. No, he said. He has taken the next step. Outside the secure room, preparations for the shareholders' meeting continued. Employees arranged seating, tested screens, printed credentials, and prepared coffee for people who would decide the future of thousands of workers. Most of them had no idea that Richard's confidence was being built one controlled lie at a time, or that Annie Brooks, still wearing a temporary badge, had helped make each lie sound real enough to expose the truth. By 9:30 that night, Harrington Tower had emptied into rain. The last executives had left through the private garage. Most of the administrative staff were gone, and only the cleaning crews, security officers, and technical team remained. Annie stood inside the auditorium's glass control booth, checking the backup presentation for the 3rd time. Eleanor had already told her to go home, but Annie wanted the files verified before the shareholders arrived in the morning. Every video had a duplicate. Every document had a printed copy. Every cue had been logged by time. Mr. Lewis, the older stagehand, appeared at the booth door carrying his coat. You planning to sleep in here? I'm almost finished. You said that 40 minutes ago. Annie glanced at the clock. 10 more minutes. That is what young people say before an hour disappears. He handed her a paper cup. Coffee? Hot chocolate. Coffee at your age is how bad habits begin. Annie smiled. My mother would agree with you. Your mother sounds smarter every time you mention her. Mr. Lewis left through the side corridor, and Annie returned to the screen. Rain tapped against the high windows beyond the stage. The empty auditorium felt larger without people. Rows of dark seats facing a silent platform where the company's future would be decided in less than 12 hours. At 9:43, the service elevator indicator lit on the executive level. Annie looked up. No delivery was scheduled. She checked the late access list on her tablet. Cleaning staff had permission for the lower floors. 2 network technicians were approved for the 22nd floor. But no one was assigned to the auditorium. The elevator doors opened. 2 men stepped out wearing gray contractor jackets and temporary badges. One carried a hard black case used for network equipment. The other pulled a dark cap low over his forehead when he saw the cameras. Annie moved away from the booth window before they looked up. She opened the secure contact on her phone and sent Marcus a message. 2 unlisted contractors entering auditorium level through service elevator, 9:43 p.m. 1 equipment case. I am in control booth. His reply arrived within seconds. Do not approach. Lock booth. Security moving. Annie reached for the door lock, then stopped. The 2 men did not walk toward the stage. They turned into the technical corridor behind the auditorium, where the presentation servers and evidence backups were stored. The booth lock would protect her, but it would also leave the technical room exposed. She called Marcus. They're heading toward the server room. Stay where you are. If they delete the files, we have copies. Annie knew that was true, but the main evidence package included timestamps, verification records, and the sequence prepared for the board. Damage to the original system could delay the presentation long enough for Richard to take procedural control of the meeting. A faint metallic sound came through the wall, the server room door opening. Annie lowered her voice. They're inside. Security is 2 minutes away. 2 minutes was not long in a hallway. It was more than enough time at a keyboard. Annie left the booth through the rear door and moved into the storage room beside it. Heavy stage curtains hung from metal racks. Display boards, folded podium signs, and spare lighting stands filled the narrow space. From there, she could hear the men through the ventilation grill. Find the camera folder first, one said. The meeting package? Replace it after you wipe the original. A case clicked open. Another voice answered. What about the girl? If she was here, she's gone. She's the one they'll blame? That's the idea. Temporary badge, access record. No one important. Annie took out her phone and started recording. The words were clear, but she knew a private recording might later be challenged. She needed witnesses. On the wall beside the curtain racks was a secondary event panel. Annie was authorized to use it for sound checks and emergency announcements. Her father's lesson returned to her. Understand the system before touching the wire. The auditorium microphones were routed through 3 channels. The server room had an internal communication mic used by technicians during rehearsals. Under normal conditions, it fed only into headsets. Annie selected the internal channel. Then she routed it to the main auditorium speakers. A man's voice exploded through the empty room. Delete the backup after the main file. Richard said the vote has to happen before William can show anything. The intruders stopped speaking. What was that? You hit something. I didn't touch the board. Their footsteps moved quickly. Annie kept the channel open. The second man said, Get the drive. We're leaving. The server room door slammed open. Security officers entered from the east corridor. One shouted for the men to stop. A crash followed. Someone ran toward the loading stairs while the other was thrown against the wall. Annie stayed inside the storage room until Marcus called her name. Miss Brooks? I'm here. He found her crouched beside the event panel. Her phone still recording. Eleanor arrived behind him, followed by 2 security officers leading one of the intruders away in handcuffs. The second man had escaped through the loading area. Marcus looked at the control panel, then at Annie. You routed their private channel into the auditorium? Yes. Why? So more than one person would hear them. Marcus gave a slow nod. Good decision. Only after he said it did Annie notice how badly her hands were shaking. Eleanor took the phone from her before she dropped it. You should have stayed in the booth. I know. You could have been found. I know. That was not praise. I know that too. Eleanor's anger softened when she saw Annie trying to steady her breathing. She guided her to a chair backstage. Annie pressed both palms against her knees. I almost ignored it. Why? Because every time I notice something, someone says I'm making too much of it. Eleanor sat beside her. The people who taught you to doubt yourself were counting on that doubt to protect them. Marcus returned from the technical room carrying the intruder's equipment case. They attempted to delete the camera footage and replace tomorrow's presentation. Nothing was lost. Did the arrested man talk? Eleanor asked. Not yet. Annie looked toward the service corridor. The other one said Richard's name. We heard it, Marcus said. The auditorium system recorded everything. William arrived 20 minutes later, still wearing his overcoat. He crossed the stage without greeting anyone and stopped in front of Annie. Are you hurt? No, sir. Did they see you? I don't think so. His jaw tightened. You are finished for tonight. Security will take you and your mother to the safe apartment. Annie started to protest. That is not a request. She looked at Marcus. He's right, Marcus said. You have done enough. Before Annie left, Marcus's secure phone sounded. He read the message once. Then again, William noticed. What is it? The final voting projection. Marcus turned the screen toward him. A senior director who had supported William for 28 years had changed sides. Combined with Richard's existing allies and the Blackridge voting bloc, the numbers now favored the no-confidence motion. By how much? William asked. 2 votes. The stage behind them was still lit from the emergency response. Rows of empty seats faced the chairman's table. Richard had failed to destroy the evidence, but by morning, he might control the room before William had the chance to show it. William looked toward Annie. "Are you afraid?" She answered honestly, "Yes." "Then go home." Annie stood and picked up her work bag. "Fear is not permission, Mr. Harrington." William watched her leave with Eleanor. Across the city, Richard stood before the windows of his apartment, reading the speech he planned to deliver after taking his brother's chair. William woke before dawn after less than 3 hours of sleep. The Westchester house was silent except for the old clock in the downstairs hall, which marked 5 with 5 measured chimes. He dressed without calling his valet. A dark navy suit, white shirt, and gray tie waited on the back of a chair. On the dresser sat the leather box that once held the platinum lapel pin. William opened it. The original pin remained in federal custody, sealed as evidence. Inside the box now rested only the fitted velvet where it had once lain. He ran a thumb over the empty space, then closed the lid. For the first time at a major company event, he left his lapel bare. Downstairs, he made coffee and placed 2 slices of bread in the toaster. The household staff would arrive within the hour. But he did not want anyone moving quietly around him that morning. He needed the ordinary sound of a knife spreading butter, the smell of coffee, and the small click of the toaster cooling on the counter. On the table lay a handwritten letter from an employee at the Toledo plant. William had read it twice the night before. He opened it again. The writer, Earl Bennett, had retired after 37 years with Harrington Global. His pension helped pay for his wife's cancer medication. His son worked at the same plant. His granddaughter had recently applied for the Employee Scholarship Program. Earl had written, "I do not understand everything happening in New York, but I hope the people voting remember that numbers on a page still belong to somebody's life." William folded the letter and placed it inside his jacket. Marcus arrived at 6:15. William stood when he entered the breakfast room. "You did not need to come here," William said. "I did not trust you to eat." "I had toast." Marcus glanced at the untouched second slice. "Half a piece of toast is not breakfast." William poured him coffee. They reviewed the final plan at the table. The evidence presentation had been restored after the attempted sabotage. 3 complete copies now existed on separate systems. One was in the auditorium. One was held by outside counsel. The third was in federal custody. "The arrested intruder requested an attorney," Marcus said. "He has not given a statement. He does not need to." The auditorium recording captured Richard's name. It captured a man claiming Richard gave instructions. The financial evidence and Vale's testimony remain more important. "Will Vale appear?" "He signed the cooperation agreement at 4 this morning." William looked toward the window. He waited until he knew which side was likely to survive. "Men like Vale call that judgment. My father called it cowardice with a calculator." Marcus almost smiled. "The investigators will remain outside the auditorium until company counsel confirms the corrupted shares and the board hears the evidence," he said. "We still need to follow procedure. And if Richard takes control of the meeting before we present it, your bylaws guarantee the chairman a response to a no-confidence motion. Unless the board votes to suspend procedure, they will need a reason. Richard will invent one." Marcus put down his coffee. "Then do not give him the room through anger. Let him believe you are losing until Annie receives the signal." William nodded. They left Westchester in a black Lincoln as the sky began to lighten. The rain had stopped, but the roads remained wet. Commuter trains moved south beside them. Delivery trucks filled the highway. At several exits, workers waited beside bus shelters with lunch bags and paper cups. William watched them through the window. Most would never enter Harrington Tower. Some might own shares through retirement funds. Others might work for suppliers, contractors, or local businesses dependent on company facilities. None had been asked whether Richard's chairmanship was worth their medical coverage or mortgage payments. At 7:30, Annie and Helen arrived outside the tower in another company car. Helen had come directly from the hospital. She still wore scrubs beneath her best dark blue coat, and exhaustion showed around her eyes. Before Annie opened the car door, Helen caught her wrist. "Look at me." Annie did. "You speak clearly. You do not rush because important people are impatient, and you do not apologize for knowing what you know." "Yes, ma'am. Politeness is not surrender." "I know." Helen adjusted the collar of Annie's white blouse. "Call me before you decide to be brave." Annie gave her a tired smile. "I may have to call from the control booth." "Then call quietly." Inside the lobby, Collins was no longer at the security desk. An outside team had taken temporary control. One of the guards who had watched Annie's bag being searched addressed her before she reached the turnstile. "Good morning, Miss Brooks." "Good morning." He opened the gate. The respect came late, and Annie knew it. Still, she returned the greeting. Her mother had taught her that another person's failure did not have to decide her manners. Helen watched until Annie entered the private elevator with Eleanor. The upper floors were already busy. Caterers arranged coffee, fruit, bagels, and pastries outside the auditorium. Legal teams carried document boxes through side corridors. Reporters gathered near the media entrance. Longtime employees stood in small groups, speaking quietly about the vote. Mr. Lewis met Annie backstage. "You came back. So did you." "I am too old to miss a good fight. This is a shareholders' meeting. At my age, those are the fights with the best chairs." He handed her a replacement headset. "I checked the booth myself. No strangers, no missing files, and no one hiding behind the curtains." "Thank you. Do not thank me yet. Get through the morning first." William entered the tower through the private garage. On his way to the auditorium, he passed a group of employees from regional offices. One man wore a 25-year service pin. An older woman held a photograph of the North Carolina facility where 3 generations of her family had worked. They stopped speaking when William approached. He could have continued toward the elevator. Instead, he stopped. "Good morning," the woman answered. "Good morning, Mr. Harrington." William looked at the photograph. "Which facility?" "Greenville. My father started there in 1978. Is he still with us?" "He passed 3 years ago." "I'm sorry." She nodded. He was proud of that place. William looked at the faces around her. "I know what today means to you," the man with the service pin answered carefully. "With respect, sir, I do not think anyone upstairs knows what it means to us." William accepted the rebuke. "You may be right." He took Earl Bennett's letter from his pocket but did not show it to them. "I intend to remember before the day is over." When he reached the board level, Richard was already waiting near the auditorium entrance. His suit was black, his tie burgundy, and his expression calm enough for the cameras positioned beyond the doors. He opened his arms and embraced William before the press could see any distance between them. "You should have stepped aside while you still had dignity," Richard whispered. William felt no surprise, only sadness that his brother's voice had finally become easier to recognize. "Dignity is not measured by whether a man loses," William replied. "It is measured by what he is willing to destroy in order to win." Richard stepped back, smiling for the cameras. Inside the auditorium, directors took their places at the raised table. Investors filled the first rows. Reporters opened laptops. Helen stood near the rear wall beside several employees who had been invited as observers. Annie entered the glass control booth and checked the evidence package one final time. Marcus sat directly behind William. Eleanor remained near the stage entrance. Federal investigators waited beyond the secured doors. The company secretary called the meeting to order. Routine business lasted less than 10 minutes. Then Richard rose. He buttoned his jacket and placed one hand on the table. "Mr. Chairman, in light of recent failures in leadership and the growing loss of shareholder confidence, I formally request an emergency vote of no confidence." A murmur moved through the auditorium. William looked toward the glass booth. Annie sat with one hand near the control panel, waiting for a signal that had not yet come. Richard remained standing. For the first time that morning, he looked less like William's younger brother than a man already imagining himself in William's chair. Richard's motion remained before the board while the company secretary reviewed the bylaws. No one spoke above a whisper. Reporters typed beneath the glow of their screens, and several investors leaned toward their attorneys. William sat with both hands resting on the table. Richard remained standing. The company secretary adjusted his glasses. Under Article 7, a no-confidence motion may proceed if supported by 2 sitting directors. Thomas Keller raised his hand. "I support the motion." A second director, Linda Mercer, followed. "As do I." The secretary nodded. "The motion is properly before the board." A murmur moved through the auditorium. Annie watched from the control booth as a red indicator appeared beside the voting system. Richard had reached the point he had spent months preparing for. William looked at Thomas Keller. They had known each other for nearly 30 years. Thomas had attended William's father's funeral, stood beside him at plant openings, and once spent Christmas Eve at the Westchester house after a snowstorm closed the roads. Thomas avoided his eyes. Richard stepped into the open area beside the board table. "This is not a decision I take lightly," he began. "My brother has served this company for many years, and no one can deny what he has built." William heard the practiced respect beneath the accusation. "But leadership is not measured by past success alone," Richard continued. "It must be measured by judgment under pressure. Over the last several months, Harrington Global has faced delayed agreements, declining confidence, and private decisions made without sufficient board oversight." He turned toward the shareholders. "Our employees deserve stability. Our investors deserve transparency. This company deserves leadership that does not confuse personal control with responsibility." Several people applauded. The sound was brief but enough to encourage him. Richard displayed a series of financial charts. Some contained real weaknesses. A delayed expansion agreement had created uncertainty. William had centralized major decisions around a small group. Several directors had complained privately about being excluded. Richard did not need to invent every charge. He only needed to arrange selected truths around a lie. He pointed toward a line showing recent stock movement. "In the last 2 weeks alone, market concern has erased hundreds of millions of dollars in value." Marcus leaned closer to William. "The decline began after Blackridge's coordinated sales." "I know," Richard continued. "We have also learned that major lenders are reconsidering their commitments, and that important board members no longer trust the current chairman's ability to complete the pending investment agreement." The false information fed through the replacement pin had become part of Richard's case. William glanced toward Marcus. His brother had believed every word. Richard rested both hands on the table. "I am therefore asking this board to appoint temporary leadership, begin an independent review, and protect the company before further damage occurs." A pension fund representative stood. "Mr. Harrington, which Mr. Harrington, I suppose, can either of you assure us that employee retirement obligations are safe?" Richard answered before William could speak. "Yes. Under new leadership, protecting pensions will remain a priority." William felt Earl Bennett's letter inside his jacket. He had seen the draft agreement that cut those same obligations. An older employee seated near the aisle shook her head, though she did not yet know why. The company secretary called for preliminary statements from the directors. Thomas Keller spoke first. "I have respected William for many years. This is not personal, but the board has become too dependent on one man." Another director expressed concern about the delayed investment agreement. A third questioned why William had not publicly addressed recent rumors. Each statement pushed the room farther toward Richard. The preliminary count appeared on the monitors. 7 in favor of removal, 5 opposed, 2 undecided. Richard needed only one of the undecided directors to win. He looked toward William's chair. For a moment, his expression changed. The smile became smaller, private. He placed one hand on the carved wooden back, as though testing whether it already belonged to him. William watched him. At 19, he had signed guardianship documents so Richard would not be placed in the care of distant relatives. At 21, he had delayed his own plans to keep their home and father's company stable. For years, he had mistaken the act of standing between Richard and consequences for the act of standing beside him. Now Richard stood within reach of the chair and appeared to believe William's love had made him weak. The secretary turned toward William. "Mr. Chairman, you have the right to respond before the vote proceeds." Richard spoke at once. "The financial record is already before the board. A delay will only deepen uncertainty." Company counsel leaned toward the microphone. "The bylaws guarantee the sitting chairman a reasonable response." Richard looked toward her. "No one is denying him a response. I am questioning whether this meeting should become another performance, designed to avoid accountability." A few shareholders nodded. William rose. He did not touch the prepared notes before him. "My brother has made several claims that deserve an answer," he said. "Some concern my leadership. Those questions are legitimate." Richard's expression tightened slightly. William continued. "I have concentrated too much authority in this office. I have sometimes treated consultation as delay. I have asked people to trust decisions I did not fully explain." The admission disturbed the room more than denial would have. Marcus watched Richard. He had expected William to defend himself, not concede weakness. William looked toward the employee section. The board should examine those failures, whether I remain chairman or not. Richard interrupted. Then you agree, new leadership is required. I agree that leadership must be accountable. William turned toward him, but accountability must rest on information obtained lawfully, votes acquired honestly, and promises made to employees in good faith. Richard held his gaze. If you have an accusation, make it. I have a question. William faced the board. How many people in this room knew the price of Harrington stock would fall before the market knew why? No one answered. How many purchased shares through companies designed to conceal that they were acting together? A lawyer in the front row stopped writing. Richard gave a dismissive laugh. This is speculation. Then you will have no objection to evidence. Richard looked toward the large screens. His confidence did not disappear, but William saw the first calculation behind his eyes. Richard said, any evidence should be reviewed by counsel before it is shown publicly. It has been, by lawyers who work for you, by outside counsel and federal investigators. The room changed. Several directors turned toward the secured doors. Richard's hand left the chairman's chair. He recovered quickly. This is an attempt to frighten the board. If federal investigators were involved, they would be present. William did not answer. He looked toward Marcus. Marcus checked the message on his secure phone. Outside counsel had confirmed that Jonathan Vale had entered the building and that the federal team was in position. He gave a single nod. William lifted his eyes toward the control booth. Through the glass, Annie saw the signal. Her hand moved to the keyboard. For 1 second, she remembered her first morning in the building, when staff members called her the intern, because no one had bothered to learn her name. She remembered Collins opening her bag, Richard offering money for her silence, and the 2 men in the server room saying no one important would be blamed. Then she pressed the command. The financial charts disappeared. The main screen went black. Richard turned toward it. A timestamp appeared in the lower corner. The video began with an empty office. Richard entered carrying the leather case that held the platinum pin. No one in the auditorium moved. On the screen, he locked the door, removed the precision tool, opened the pin, and fitted the black device inside. Richard's face lost color. This recording is illegal, he said. Company counsel answered from the board table. The camera was located in the chairman's private office and installed after a documented security breach. The recording has been reviewed. The video showed Richard connecting the device to his phone. The light flashed. He wiped the pin and returned it to its case. When the footage ended, the screen changed to a map of shell companies. Marcus stepped to the microphone. Each company displayed here purchased Harrington Global shares using funds connected to Blackridge Capital and its partners. Together, they accumulated nearly 11% of voting stock. Documents followed. Dates, wire transfers, account links, and purchases made within hours of conversations captured by the listening device. Richard looked toward Thomas Keller. Thomas did not look back. The next recording played. Richard's voice filled the auditorium. Complete the purchases. The company will never be this vulnerable again. Then came the asset sale agreement. The screen listed plant closures, pension reductions, canceled scholarships, and 12,000 eliminated positions. The older employee near the aisle covered her mouth. Richard moved away from the board table. These documents can be fabricated. William said nothing. An audio recording began. Richard's voice from conference room 12 was clear. This company forgets interns every season. Their names disappear from directories, their badges stop working, and no one asks why. Then Annie's reply. Then you would not need to threaten me. Richard looked up toward the booth. He saw her behind the glass. For the first time that morning, he was no longer looking at an intern. He was looking at the person who had refused to disappear. He pointed toward her. That girl manufactured this. She had access to the event systems, private rooms, and presentation files. My brother is using a frightened child to save his position. A murmur spread across the room. Annie's hand remained on the console. Richard had lost control of the evidence, but he had found his final defense. He would not challenge what the room had seen. He would make the room question the person who helped them see it. For several seconds, no one in the auditorium moved. Richard's accusation hung over the room because it offered frightened people an easier choice than the evidence did. They could examine months of transactions, recordings, and concealed agreements, or they could doubt the 18-year-old black intern standing behind the glass. Richard understood that weakness and pressed it. She had access to backstage systems, he said. She handled private equipment. She entered restricted rooms. She has been rewarded with direct access to my brother and his advisors. Now we are expected to believe she somehow uncovered a conspiracy involving senior executives, investment funds, and millions of shares. A director near the center of the table frowned toward the control booth. Was Miss Brooks authorized to access these files? No, Richard answered before anyone else could. That is precisely the point. William rose, but Marcus touched his arm. Let her answer. Inside the booth, Annie removed her headset. Her fingers felt cold despite the heat from the equipment. She looked through the glass at the board members, attorneys, reporters, and employees waiting below. Helen stood near the back wall. She did not wave. She only lifted her chin. Annie opened the booth door. The walk to the front of the auditorium seemed longer than it had during every rehearsal. She passed Collins's former security station, the managers who had once called her overly ambitious, and employees who had watched her bag being searched without asking why. Eleanor met her beside the stage. You do not have to prove everything yourself, she whispered. I know. Annie stepped toward the microphone. My name is Annie Brooks, she said. The room quieted. I am 18 years old. I have worked for Harrington Global for less than 2 weeks. I do not own enough stock to change a vote. I do not have a title that can frighten anyone in this room. I had only what I saw, what I heard, and the choice not to lie about it. Richard gave a short laugh. A prepared speech. Annie looked at him. No. Prepared speeches are usually longer. A few people shifted in their seats. She turned back to the board. I did not discover the financial transactions. Mr. Reed's forensic team did. I did not install the private office camera. Mr. Harrington did that years before I arrived. I did not authorize the federal investigation, retrieve bank records, or identify the shell companies. She paused. What I did was notice a red light beneath a lapel pin. I saw that the casing was warm and uneven. I reported meetings in service corridors because those meetings were not on the event schedule. I repeated words I personally heard Mr. Richard Harrington say. When he offered to pay my tuition in exchange for changing my statement, I reported that too. Richard leaned toward his microphone. You misunderstood a scholarship conversation. Annie faced him. You told me interns disappear from corporate directories every season and no one asks why. That was career advice. No, sir. Advice does not punish someone for refusing it. Company counsel activated the next recording. Richard's offer played through the auditorium, followed by his threat. The words sounded worse without his calm expression attached to them. Annie continued. Last night, 2 men entered the technical level without authorization. I did not follow them. I notified security. I used an event channel I was authorized to operate so their conversation could be heard by witnesses. The building system recorded them saying the files had to be deleted before Mr. Harrington could show them. Marcus approached the second microphone. Every statement Miss Brooks made has been compared with access logs, video, audio, financial records, or independent testimony. Where she offered an opinion, it is labeled as an opinion. Where she described an observation, the time and location were verified. He placed a report before the board secretary. This is the technical analysis of the listening device. This is the chain of custody for the lapel pin. This is the forensic report connecting the shell companies. None of these documents was created or controlled by Miss Brooks. The secured doors opened. 2 federal agents entered with outside counsel. Behind them walked Jonathan Vale. Richard's face changed. Vale avoided his eyes as he took a seat near the front. The lead agent introduced herself and confirmed that Vale had entered a cooperation agreement. She then stated that federal investigators had monitored communications between Richard, Blackridge Capital, and participating shareholder groups under lawful authorization. Richard gripped the edge of the table. You gave them everything? Vale looked at him. I gave them what they already knew. The company secretary received a document from counsel and read it twice. The shares acquired through the 6 identified shell companies are subject to an emergency legal hold. They cannot be counted in today's vote. Thomas Keller lowered his head. The balance in the room shifted. Richard turned toward William. You planned all of this. I responded to what you did. You used me. You placed a listening device on my chest. Richard stepped away from the board table. You had everything. Father trusted you. Mother depended on you. The company carried your name as though I were a guest in my own family. William's voice remained quiet. I raised you. You controlled me. I protected you. You made me live as William Harrington's younger brother. William looked at him for a long moment. I gave you protection when you needed responsibility. I gave you another chance when you needed a consequence. I called that love because I was afraid of what the truth would require from me. Richard's anger broke through his polished manner. You chose an intern over your own blood. No, William said. I chose the truth over the lie that blood makes wrongdoing sacred. The board secretary called for an immediate motion to suspend Richard from all executive authority. Every eligible director except Thomas Keller voted in favor. Keller abstained. Federal agents approached. Richard looked toward the rear of the auditorium, searching perhaps for an ally, perhaps for an exit. He found neither. As an agent placed him under arrest, he looked back at William. Would Mother be proud of you? Pain crossed William's face, but his answer did not change. She asked me not to abandon you. She never asked me to abandon everyone else for you. Richard was escorted toward the doors. The cameras followed him, but William did not. He looked instead at the employees seated along the side of the auditorium. Some were crying. Others stared at the projected list of facilities that had nearly been sold. The no-confidence motion was withdrawn. The corrupted vote was invalidated. The board ordered an independent review of William's leadership and the company's security practices. William accepted both decisions. After the auditorium began to empty, Annie stood near the stage with Helen and Eleanor. The force that had carried her to the microphone was gone, leaving exhaustion behind. William approached her. Thank you, Miss Brooks. Annie looked toward Marcus, Eleanor, the investigators, and her mother. A lot of people protected the evidence. Yes, and some people should have listened earlier. Yes, William said, including me. At the board table, an evidence technician placed the platinum lapel pin inside a clear bag and sealed it. The Harrington family heirloom had once represented honor. Now it represented proof, and for the first time in decades, William understood that preserving a family name did not mean protecting it from shame. It meant refusing to pass that shame to the next generation. 6 months later, the platinum lapel pin remained sealed in a federal evidence room. Richard Harrington was awaiting trial on charges that included illegal surveillance, securities fraud, insider trading, witness intimidation, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Jonathan Vail had entered a plea agreement. 2 executives resigned before the board could remove them, and 3 investment firms were under federal review. Harrington Global survived, but William refused to describe the outcome as a victory. The company created an independent ethics board, strengthened whistleblower protections, and placed employee pensions beyond the reach of any single executive decision. Security procedures were rewritten. Anonymous complaints could no longer be used to search junior employees without documented cause. The internship program was reviewed for racial and class discrimination, and William surrendered several powers he had controlled for years without meaningful oversight. Marcus told him some directors would see the changes as weakness. They are not entirely wrong, William said. A system that depends on one man being good every day is already weak. He visited Richard once at the Federal Detention Center. They sat across from each other beneath fluorescent lights. Richard wore a plain uniform and looked older than he had in the boardroom. For several minutes, neither brother spoke. William finally said, I will pay for competent legal representation. Richard gave a bitter laugh. Still protecting me? No. Making sure the process is lawful. Do you expect gratitude? No. Richard leaned back. You destroyed me in front of the world. You did that before I knew what you were doing. You chose strangers over your own brother. William thought of Annie at the microphone, Helen standing near the rear wall, and the employees staring at the list of plants Richard had intended to close. I chose the people who would have paid for your anger. Richard looked away. William did not ask for forgiveness, and Richard offered none. When the visit ended, William stood. I loved you before I knew what you had done, he said. Knowing does not erase that. It only means love cannot be used to stop justice. Richard did not answer. At the Westchester house, William placed the funeral photograph inside the bottom drawer of his mother's writing desk. He did not destroy it. The 2 boys in the picture had existed, and the years between them had not all been false, but he no longer kept the photograph where memory could make decisions for him. Annie began college courses in technology, organizational risk, and corporate ethics. Marcus supervised her training twice a week. He taught her how to read incident reports, distinguish evidence from assumption, and ask questions without revealing what she already knew. She still lived with Helen in Queens. She still rode the subway when security conditions allowed, helped carry groceries up 3 flights of stairs, and repaired the old radio whenever its signal weakened. On Sunday mornings, members of their church stopped her after service to offer advice she had not requested. A retired teacher helped her organize scholarship applications for younger students. Mr. Scholar. Lewis occasionally called to remind her that expensive conference equipment still failed when people ignored simple instructions. Annie's life had changed, but it had not become effortless. Some classmates treated her as a minor celebrity after seeing her name in the news. Others suggested she had advanced because a billionaire felt guilty. Annie learned not to answer every insult. She also learned not to let silence become agreement. At a youth meeting in the church basement, a 14-year-old girl asked how Annie had been brave enough to challenge powerful men. "I wasn't brave the whole time," Annie said. "I was scared in the stairwell, in the control booth, and before I walked to that microphone." "Then how did you do it?" "I kept records. I called people I trusted. I did not try to become the whole investigation by myself." Helen, arranging paper cups near the back wall, smiled at that answer. Harrington Global's anniversary celebration took place in the same auditorium where Richard had attempted to remove William. This time, the front rows did not belong only to investors and directors. Union representatives sat beside senior executives. Maintenance workers, assistants, kitchen staff, plant supervisors, technical crews, scholarship students, and retired employees had been invited. Earl Bennett came from Ohio with his wife. She carried her medication in a small blue case and thanked William for protecting the pension program. William shook Earl's hand. "I remembered what you told me in the cafeteria years ago." Earl looked confused. "About your daughter's nursing school and the mortgage. That was a long time ago. It should not have taken me this long to understand it." Before the ceremony, William stood backstage while Annie reviewed the schedule. She wore a simple dark suit, and her temporary event badge had been replaced by a permanent company credential bearing her full name. Helen sat in the front row wearing a navy dress and the pearl earrings Calvin had given her on their 10th anniversary. Eleanor approached with a revised media list. "Every major network is here," she said. William glanced through the curtain. "They came for a story. Give them the right one." When he stepped onto the stage, the audience rose. William waited for them to sit before beginning. "6 months ago, this company came close to losing more than a chairman," he said. "It came close to losing jobs, pensions, scholarship programs, and the trust of the people who built it." He did not mention Richard by name. "We were not saved by a famous family, an expensive security system, or the wealth represented in this room. We were saved because an 18-year-old backstage intern noticed what everyone else had missed and refused to be silent when silence would have been safer." He turned toward Annie. "Miss Brooks, would you join me?" The applause began before she reached the stage. Annie walked to the microphone and stood beside him. William waited until the room settled. "Annie Brooks did more than discover a listening device," he said. "She reminded this company that ability does not arrive wearing a title, loyalty does not belong to one class of people, and truth does not become smaller because the person speaking it is young." He paused. "She was doubted, searched, threatened, and treated as though she needed to prove she belonged before her words deserved attention. That was not the failure of one security manager. It was an institutional failure, and I was responsible for the institution." Several executives shifted in their seats. William continued, "We have made changes, but policies do not erase what happened. They only show whether we learned from it." He stepped away from the microphone. Annie looked across the audience. She saw Helen, Marcus, Eleanor, Mr. Lewis, Earl Bennett, and several young interns standing along the side wall. "I am grateful," she said. "But I hope the next person does not have to save a company before anyone treats her with respect." The audience rose again. Later, after the cameras had gone and the catering staff began clearing the reception, William asked Annie to join him in his office. Marcus was already there with a folder. William placed it on the desk. "This is a formal position," he said, "not a ceremonial title." Annie opened the folder. "Special Assistant for Executive Risk Observation and Strategic Coordination." The position included part-time work, tuition support, structured training, and direct supervision under Marcus. It allowed her to attend selected strategy meetings while continuing college. Annie read every page. I do not want to be hired because you feel responsible for what happened. I do feel responsible. That is not what I asked. William nodded. You are being hired because you identified a security threat, documented irregular activity, resisted pressure, and understood the limits of your role. Marcus believes you have judgment that can be trained. Marcus added, I said you ask better questions than some people earning 10 times what we are offering. Annie looked at the salary. Only 10 times? Marcus smiled. We can review that after graduation. She signed. Before the next investment conference, Annie met William in the green room. She checked his microphone, schedule, tie, and jacket. His left lapel was empty. Then she handed him a small box. Inside was an inexpensive metal pin shaped like an open eye. A craft worker from her church in Queens had made it by hand. William lifted it carefully. What does it mean? That looking is not the same as seeing. He fastened it to his lapel. Annie stepped back and inspected the placement. Do you notice anything unusual today? William asked. She checked the room, the doors, the staff, and the equipment beyond the curtain. Not yet, Mr. Harrington. He waited. Annie smiled. But this time you remembered to ask. The curtain opened. William walked toward the stage, and Annie followed with the schedule in her hand. She remained behind the curtain, where every public success depended on people whose names were rarely announced. A billion-dollar company had nearly fallen because one brother believed love would keep another brother blind. It survived because a young woman standing where powerful people rarely looked understood something her father had taught her years before. Most failures whisper before they break, and this time, someone listened. The story reminds us that truth does not become less important because it comes from someone young, overlooked, or without power. Real leadership begins with listening, especially to people who are often ignored. Loyalty should never be used to excuse betrayal. And love does not require protecting someone from the consequences of their choices. Justice becomes meaningful when it protects ordinary families, holds powerful people accountable, and changes the system so the next person does not have to suffer before being believed. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.